The Royal Guards have been an essential part of a nation's history for centuries. These highly trained individuals, often seen standing tall in ceremonial uniforms, represent more than just protection. They embody the pride, history, and traditions of the nation. Their role goes far beyond guarding buildings or royal family members. They serve as living symbols of the country's strength and continuity. In many places, the Royal Guards have been stationed for generations, their presence steeped in tradition, discipline, and respect. They are not just ordinary soldiers, but are part of the national identity, often considered among the most elite and respected members of the military. The Royal Guards are trained to uphold the highest standards of conduct. Their training is rigorous, focused on both physical endurance and mental resilience. They must be able to stand motionless for hours in all weather conditions, endure public scrutiny, and remain silent even in the face of distractions. This level of discipline is instilled in them from a young age and requires years of practice. Every movement, every action is deliberate, and they are trained to never show any emotion, no matter the circumstances. Their stoic presence is a testament to their commitment to the job. For many, the chance to serve as a Royal Guard is seen as the pinnacle of their career, a symbol of trust, honor, and achievement. Their uniforms are just as important as their training. Brightly colored, with detailed accessories like plumed hats, medals, and polished boots, the Royal Guard's appearance is meant to impress both those they protect and those who observe them. When people see the Royal Guard standing still, they are not just witnessing soldiers. They are seeing centuries of tradition. These guards are also trained to march in perfect formation, and their movements during ceremonies are carefully coordinated. Every footstep is in sync. Every movement is precise. It is a display of perfection, and a reminder that the guards are not there just to protect. They are there to represent the nation itself. The Royal Guards are not just there for show, though. They play a critical role in maintaining security at significant national events, such as state visits, public holidays, and royal ceremonies. Whether it's protecting the royal family during an official event or keeping watch during public celebrations, the guards are always alert, ready to respond to any threat. But their job isn't just about responding to danger. It's also about setting an example. Their very presence is a reminder of the values that the country holds dear: discipline, strength, and tradition. Even though they appear calm and unflinching, the Royal Guards are trained to handle difficult situations. They are prepared for any emergency, whether it be dealing with crowd control or responding to a security breach. They take their jobs seriously, understanding that the safety of the people they protect is paramount. But they are also aware that their role is not just about protection. It's about upholding the dignity and respect of the nation. Their presence is a constant reminder that certain traditions and values must be respected by all, regardless of circumstances. As centuries passed, the role of the Royal Guards has evolved, but the respect they command has remained unchanged. They represent more than just military power. They are symbols of continuity and stability. In many countries, their job is still viewed as one of the highest honors. To serve as a Royal Guard is to be entrusted with something far greater than oneself: the responsibility of guarding a nation's most cherished traditions. Their unwavering loyalty, discipline, and commitment to duty have earned them admiration and respect from both the public and their peers. The Royal Guard's work is often unseen and uncelebrated, yet it is undeniably crucial. They may stand silently in the background, but their presence speaks volumes. The weight of history rests on their shoulders, and they are ready to carry it forward, no matter what. To disrespect the Royal Guards is to disrespect the very traditions they represent. And while their duty may seem simple, standing still, maintaining order, their job is anything but easy. It requires dedication, a deep understanding of history, and above all, an unwavering commitment to the nation they serve. It was a bright, sunny day at one of the most iconic landmarks in the country, where tourists from all over the world gathered to catch a glimpse of the majestic Royal Guards. Visitors were snapping pictures, chatting excitedly with one another, and observing the guards standing tall in their elaborate uniforms, as they had done for years. For the most part, everything was peaceful, and the ceremony continued as expected. The royal guards stood motionless, their eyes scanning the crowds, unwavering in their dedication to the role they had sworn to protect. However, not everyone who visited understood the significance of the moment. A man in his mid-30s, a tourist visiting for the first time, approached the guards with a sense of curiosity and playfulness. He had heard of the royal guards, but he hadn't fully grasped the depth of their responsibility. To him, they were just another part of the tourist experience. He noticed how the guards stood still, and the idea struck him that he might have some fun at their expense. As he walked closer, he noticed how the guards did not flinch or react to anything going on around them. Intrigued, he took a step forward, ignoring the posted signs and warnings that advised visitors not to interfere with the guards. With a mischievous grin, the man moved even closer, crossing the line that separated the royal guards from the public. The people around him noticed what was happening and whispered amongst themselves, unsure of what to do. The man, oblivious to the tension building around him, reached out to tap one of the guards on the shoulder. He thought it would be amusing to see how the guard would react, expecting some form of response, perhaps a verbal warning or even a flinch. To his surprise, the guard remained still, his eyes locked ahead, as if nothing had happened. The crowd around them grew uncomfortable, watching the man's antics, but still, the guards showed no signs of acknowledgement. At this point, the man, believing his actions hadn't caused any harm, started to mock the guards. He mimicked their posture in a silly way, throwing exaggerated poses and laughter into the air. The people around him shifted uneasily. Some were in shock, while others were shaking their heads, muttering under their breath about the disrespect the man was showing. The atmosphere grew tense as the crowd realized that this wasn't just an innocent game. It was a blatant disrespect for a long-standing tradition. The guard standing still in front of the man, his face as stern and composed as ever, remained entirely focused on his duty. He did not budge or break his military stance, despite the public disturbance. However, it was clear that the situation was starting to spiral. The presence of the guards, typically associated with reverence, now became a source of discomfort for everyone watching. The man's behavior wasn't just irritating. It was wrong in the eyes of many who held the tradition of the royal guards dear. Around the perimeter, security personnel began to notice the scene unfolding. They quickly moved closer, but the guards continued their stoic silence. The situation was now escalating, and while the guards were trained not to react to disruptions, there was a growing concern about the safety of the event. Not only was the man showing disregard for the guards, but he was also putting himself at risk by getting so close to the highly guarded ceremonial area. Finally, a nearby official stepped in, gently but firmly instructing the man to step back and cease his actions. It was clear that the guards were not going to react, but the message was now being sent in a different way. The man, still unsure of the seriousness of his actions, hesitated for a moment, but eventually complied. He was escorted away by the official, and the crowd, still buzzing with a mix of confusion and discomfort, started to settle down. Though the royal guard remained unflinching, their duty was far from over. Behind the scenes, the respect for their position was about to be reinforced in a way that the man would soon understand. The incident wasn't just a moment of personal embarrassment for him. It was a violation of something much deeper, a tradition rooted in centuries of national pride and dignity. The situation was now out of the hands of the guards and into the hands of the authorities, who would soon make sure that the man understood the seriousness of his behavior. As the man was led away, he still didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what had just transpired. To him, it was just a harmless joke, a playful interaction. However, to those who had witnessed the scene and understood the role of the royal guards, it was clear that something much larger was at stake. The guards, with their silent watch, had sent their message without ever saying a word. As the situation unfolded, The royal guards continued to stand with their usual calm composure, showing no sign of anger or frustration. Despite the man's inappropriate actions, they remained as still and disciplined as ever. It was part of their training, to remain completely unaffected by external distractions, no matter how extreme. This ability to stay calm and focused was a core principle of their role. It wasn't just about standing still. It was about showing the world that nothing could disturb the dignity of the position they held. The royal guards' commitment to their duty was something that could not be shaken by mere mockery. They knew their purpose wasn't to engage with the public or respond to the trivial actions of a single individual. Their job was much more important than that. They were symbols of national pride, and their presence reminded the public of the rich history and traditions they represented. Every day, they stood guard to protect not just the physical space around them, but the very essence of the country's values. While the man's actions were clearly disruptive, the guards were trained to ignore anything that might cause them to break their stoic silence. Even in the face of rudeness, they stood their ground. No one could sway them from their duties, not even the most extreme behaviors. It was part of the reason why royal guards were so respected. Their ability to stay calm, even when provoked, demonstrated an incredible level of self-control and focus. The bystanders watched with growing curiosity. Some found the man's behavior amusing, while others were uncomfortable. They all wondered how the royal guards would respond. But to the surprise of many, the guards didn't react at all. They didn't make eye contact with the man, nor did they move a muscle. Instead, they continued with their ceremonial duty, holding their positions with unwavering precision. This silence, this lack of response, only added to the mystique of the royal guard. It was as if they were above petty disturbances, completely immune to anything that might try to disrupt their sense of duty. For the man, this lack of response only fueled his desire to push further. He wasn't used to being ignored. People typically responded to his antics with laughter or at least some recognition. But here, the guards were different. The more he attempted to provoke them, the more they remained unmoved. This unyielding silence confused him. Didn't they care about what he was doing? Didn't they feel insulted by his behavior? To him, it seemed as if the guards were just mindlessly following orders, without a thought or feeling of their own. Yet, the truth was far from that. The royal guards weren't mindless. They understood the significance of their actions more than anyone else could. They weren't simply standing there. They were upholding a tradition that had been passed down through generations. They knew that any response, even a small gesture, could weaken the symbolism of their position. The more they remained unmoved, the stronger their message became. In their silence, they displayed the highest form of professionalism and respect for their role. As the man continued his antics, other people in the crowd began to grow uneasy. Many had heard stories about the royal guards and knew that such disrespect wouldn't go unnoticed. Whispers spread quickly, and those around the man started to subtly distance themselves, avoiding eye contact with him. It was clear that his behavior wasn't just embarrassing himself, it was embarrassing everyone who witnessed it. But still, the guards didn't move. They stood like statues, their faces unchanged, their eyes forward. After what seemed like an eternity, a member of the security staff finally approached the man, gently but firmly asking him to step away from the guards and cease his actions. The man, realizing he had pushed things too far, hesitated. He didn't expect to be confronted. He thought his playful behavior was harmless, but the stern look from the official and the unease of the crowd made it clear that he had crossed a line. Reluctantly, he stepped back, his confidence deflated. While the royal guards had not reacted to the man's behavior, the situation had not gone unnoticed by the authorities. The man's actions, however trivial he might have believed them to be, were now seen in a different light. The guards, who had remained silent throughout the entire episode, had unknowingly set the stage for what was to come. Their quiet professionalism had spoken louder than any words could have. Through their calm, They had reminded everyone present that there were certain traditions that deserved respect, and that no amount of disruption would diminish their importance. Behind the scenes, the seriousness of what had just happened began to sink in. While the royal guards maintained their unwavering stance, the authorities were already taking note of the man's actions. The disruption had not gone unnoticed, and an internal protocol was set into motion. It wasn't just about one person disrespecting the guards. It was about upholding the dignity of a long-standing tradition that held immense cultural value. The Royal Guard wasn't just a job. It was a symbol of the country's heritage, and disrespecting them was no small matter. The security personnel, trained to handle such situations with care, had swiftly intervened. While the guards themselves remained silent and unmoving, their presence acted as a silent reminder of the seriousness of the situation. As the man was led away by the authorities, the crowd slowly began to disperse. But the tension in the air lingered. There was an unspoken understanding among the bystanders that what had just occurred wasn't a lighthearted moment. The incident had shaken the public's perception of what it meant to respect the royal guards. Behind the scenes, the officials gathered to discuss the next steps. This wasn't just about a minor disturbance. It was about maintaining order and protecting the integrity of the traditions that the royal guards represented. The man's actions had disrupted not just the ceremony, but also the public's understanding of the value of respect. In a country where tradition was deeply woven into its identity, this breach could not go unchecked. Even though the royal guards themselves had not reacted to the man's actions, it was clear that there needed to be consequences. The authorities, carefully considering the situation, decided that the man should be issued a formal warning. However, this wasn't just any warning. It was an opportunity for the man to reflect on the significance of the royal guard's role. The man was informed that he would be required to apologize publicly for his behavior. This was not meant to be a mere formality. It was an opportunity for him to recognize the larger implications of his actions. His apology would serve as a reminder to everyone that some things should never be taken lightly. The apology was not just about saving face. It was about educating the public on the importance of respecting the royal guards. The authorities wanted to ensure that the man understood the significance of his behavior and how it had affected those around him. The apology would be made at the very same location where the incident had occurred, and it would be witnessed by the same people who had seen the disrespect. This wasn't just about one man. It was about reinforcing the value of respect in society. Meanwhile, the royal guards themselves remained completely unaffected by the commotion. Their professionalism had been on full display. They had done nothing to escalate the situation. Yet their quiet dignity had made a powerful statement. The authorities, while taking action behind the scenes, acknowledged the role the guards had played in preventing the situation from getting out of hand. Their ability to remain calm and composed in the face of disruption had prevented things from escalating further. It was a testament to their training and dedication to their duty. As the man prepared for his public apology, he began to reflect on the seriousness of the situation. At first, he had thought his actions were harmless, a mere bit of fun to entertain the crowd. But now, with the reality of the consequences setting in, he began to realize that he had disrespected something much bigger than he had understood. The royal guards were not just men in uniforms. They were symbols of the country's history, values, and pride. His thoughtless behavior had disrupted that respect, and now it was time for him to make things right. The stage was set for the apology. The man, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, was ready to take responsibility for his actions. He had learned that some traditions were sacred and that to disrespect them was to disrespect the very foundations of the nation. The authorities had made it clear that this lesson wasn't just for him. It was a message to everyone present. The royal guard stood silently in the background, their unwavering commitment to their role silently reinforcing the importance of tradition, respect, and dignity. News of the incident quickly spread, as such occurrences often do in a world where people are always looking for something to talk about. The story, first whispered among the crowd, was soon picked up by media outlets. Headlines appeared in newspapers, social media platforms buzzed with opinions, and TV news stations devoted entire segments to discussing what had just taken place. The actions of one tourist had ignited a firestorm of conversation about respect, tradition, and the significance of the royal guards. The public response was immediate and divided. Some people defended the man, seeing his actions as harmless mischief. They argued that he didn't mean any real harm and that perhaps he had simply misinterpreted the situation. After all, many visitors to the area had no idea of the full history and importance of the royal guards. To them, the guards were simply part of the tourist experience, an attraction to admire, not necessarily a tradition that needed to be respected in a deeply personal way. Others, however, were outraged by the man's behavior. They viewed it as an affront to something sacred, something that went far beyond the guards themselves. To them, the royal guards represented the history, culture, and pride of the nation. They were not just soldiers but symbols of everything the country stood for. Disrespecting them was seen as disrespecting the nation itself. These individuals were vocal in their condemnation of the man's actions, calling for a public apology and further consequences to ensure that such behavior would not be tolerated again. Among the supporters of the royal guards, there were even some who went so far as to suggest the man should be banned from the country or fined for causing the disruption. They felt that the incident had brought shame to the nation's reputation and that a clear message needed to be sent about the importance of respecting long-held traditions. The situation quickly grew into a national debate about what it meant to be a part of a country's culture and how outsiders should behave when visiting important landmarks and events. As the news spread, authorities worked quickly to manage the situation and maintain control over the growing public interest. The man, who had never imagined his actions would spark such a reaction, found himself in the spotlight. Interviews with him were requested, and people wanted to hear his side of the story. Some of the media outlets tried to portray him as a misguided individual who simply didn't understand the cultural significance of the royal guards. Others painted him as a troublemaker, someone who had intentionally sought to disrespect the sacred traditions of the country. For the man, the realization that his actions had caused such a stir was overwhelming. He had been caught up in the moment, thinking his antics would be laughed off and forgotten. But the reaction he had sparked had been anything but minor. The weight of the situation began to settle on his shoulders as he understood the seriousness of what he had done. He had inadvertently tested the limits of public tolerance, and the consequences were now unfolding before him. While some continued to argue on his behalf, defending his innocence, the growing chorus of those who believed in the importance of respect for tradition was louder. It was clear that, in this case, there were larger societal values at play. Values that went beyond one individual's actions. The royal guards were not just performers in a tourist attraction. They were part of the nation's soul, and disrespecting them had become a matter of national pride. The media coverage continued to escalate as the man prepared to face the consequences. His public apology was no longer just a formality. It had become a symbol of the larger cultural clash between those who respected the traditions of the royal guards and those who had not understood their significance. The man's apology, set to take place in the same location where the incident had occurred, would be broadcast for all to see. It was clear that this was not just an opportunity for him to say sorry. It was a moment for the entire nation to reflect on the importance of respect and the value of tradition. As the date of the apology drew closer, the man was confronted with the reality that this experience would stay with him for a long time. It wasn't just about making amends for his actions. It was about coming to terms with the broader lesson that had emerged from the situation. The nation, watching closely, awaited his words, and the public debate continued to swirl around the incident, its impact, and the lessons that everyone could take away from it. The day of the public apology arrived, and the atmosphere around the Royal Guard station was tense with anticipation. People gathered from all corners of the country, some to witness the apology, others out of curiosity. The media had set up cameras, reporters were preparing their questions, and the crowd seemed split between those who supported the Royal Guards and those who were sympathetic to the man. His apology had become not just a personal matter, but a national event. It was a moment for everyone to reflect on the importance of respect, tradition, and the way outsiders engaged with the nation's symbols. The man, now fully aware of the weight of the situation, stood backstage with a mix of nerves and determination. He had never imagined that a simple act of playfulness would lead to such a public spectacle. What had started as a harmless attempt to have some fun had turned into an important lesson on the importance of respecting national symbols and traditions. The man wasn't just apologizing for his behavior toward the guards. He was apologizing to everyone who viewed the Royal Guards as an integral part of their culture and history. He had spent the past few days reflecting on what had happened and what it meant. His initial feelings of being misunderstood and unjustly accused had slowly given way to a sense of responsibility. He had learned that what might seem like a harmless joke to one person could be seen as an insult to another. To the citizens who held the Royal Guards in the highest regard, the situation was much more than a momentary lapse in judgment. It was an affront to something deeply ingrained in their national identity. The man was escorted onto the stage, and as he stepped into view, the crowd fell silent. He stood for a moment, taking in the sea of faces before him, many of which seemed critical, others quietly awaiting his words. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, and for the first time, he truly understood the importance of this moment. It wasn't just about him. This was about the respect for the nation's history, the honor of the Royal Guards, and the collective pride of the people who had been offended by his actions. With a deep breath, the man began to speak, his voice slightly shaky but clear. "I stand here today to offer my sincerest apologies to the Royal Guards, to the people of this country, and to anyone who felt that I disrespected something of great importance. I admit that I made a mistake. What I thought was a harmless joke was, in fact, a disruption to something much greater than I had understood." As he spoke, he noticed the eyes of the crowd soften. There was a quiet respect in the way people listened, and for the first time since the incident, the man felt a sense of clarity. He continued, "I now know that the Royal Guards represent not just soldiers in ceremonial uniforms, but the history, the culture, and the very essence of this country. I have learned that traditions, such as the role of the Royal Guards, deserve the highest respect, and I deeply regret my actions." The crowd remained silent as the man's apology grew more heartfelt. "I acted without understanding the full significance of what I was doing, and for that, I am truly sorry. I ask for forgiveness, not just from the guards, but from everyone who values the traditions and history of this beautiful country. I understand now that respect for such symbols is essential for maintaining the unity and pride of a nation." His voice faltered for a moment as he looked at the crowd. He could see some faces showing signs of forgiveness, while others were still uncertain. "I will take this experience with me for the rest of my life," he continued, "and I will always remember that respect. True respect is not just about understanding in the moment. It's about acknowledging the depth of what something or someone represents and treating it with the honor it deserves." The man's words seemed to have an effect. The tension in the crowd began to ease, and some people even nodded in agreement. For the first time, the man realized how much he had underestimated the importance of tradition. His earlier attitude had been one of ignorance, but through this experience, he had come to understand the depth of the respect that was owed to the Royal Guards and to the people who held them in such high esteem. When he finished speaking, there was a long pause. The crowd seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps a final gesture of acceptance, or maybe just a sign that the man had truly understood the gravity of the situation. Slowly, the murmurs began, and then, almost imperceptibly at first, a round of applause began to ripple through the audience. It wasn't a loud, boisterous applause, but one of quiet acknowledgement. The man had done what was necessary, and he had done it with sincerity. In the days following the man's public apology, life seemed to return to its usual pace, but the events had left an undeniable mark on the city. The public response to the apology was a mixture of forgiveness and lingering skepticism, but there was no doubt that the incident had opened many eyes. It had become a conversation piece among the people, a reminder of the fine line between personal freedom and respect for the symbols that held a nation's identity. For the man, the apology was the beginning of a journey of reflection and growth. In the weeks that followed, he found himself thinking more deeply about his actions, not just in relation to the royal guards, but in his everyday life. He had learned a lesson far beyond the initial misunderstanding of the guard's significance. It had taught him the value of understanding, humility, and the importance of being mindful of one's actions, especially in a place where history and culture were so deeply intertwined with the present. The media, too, continued to report on the event, but with a new focus. Instead of emphasizing the controversy, stories began to surface about how the man's apology had become a pivotal moment in his life. Journalists interviewed cultural experts who spoke about the significance of the royal guards and their role in maintaining the country's cultural fabric. The apology was framed not just as an act of personal accountability, but as a broader reminder of the responsibility everyone had to respect the traditions and values that shaped their world. The royal guards, meanwhile, carried on with their duty as if nothing had changed. They continued to stand watch with the same stoic calm that they always had, unaffected by the events that had taken place. To them, the incident was just another moment in a long history of being misunderstood, respected, and sometimes disrespected. Their purpose was simple: to serve, to protect, and to maintain the dignity of their position. They weren't interested in becoming the center of attention, nor did they seek recognition for the way they had handled the situation. Their commitment to their role remained unwavering, regardless of the distractions that the outside world presented. But the effects of the incident were still being felt in subtle ways. Conversations about the apology continued to echo in the streets, at cafes, and in workplaces. People had begun to think more carefully about their actions in public spaces, especially when interacting with national symbols. It wasn't just about the royal guards anymore. It was about understanding the weight of history and the importance of showing respect to the things that shaped a country's identity. Some of the tourists who had visited the area during the incident returned, now more aware of the deeper meaning behind the guards' presence. They took time to read up on the history of the royal guards and the traditions they represented. For many, the experience had sparked an interest in learning more about the nation's history and culture, something they hadn't considered before. For the man who had caused the disruption, it became clear that he had been given an opportunity to learn and grow. His initial feelings of being misunderstood had given way to a deep sense of responsibility. He no longer saw the royal guards as just figures in ceremonial uniforms, but as symbols of something far greater than himself. He began to understand the role they played not just in guarding the palace, but in preserving the culture and values of the nation. This understanding changed his perspective on the country, its people, and the way he interacted with the world around him. While the public's attention slowly shifted away from the incident, it had left behind a lasting impact. People had been reminded of the importance of respect, not just for individuals, but for the traditions and institutions that defined their society. The man's apology, though personal, had become a symbol of the larger lessons of cultural awareness and respect for national heritage. Over time, the man's life began to return to normal, but he couldn't forget what he had learned. He had become more mindful of the symbols of culture and history around him, aware that the way he treated these things spoke volumes about his understanding of the world. In his own small way, he had contributed to a larger conversation about respect and tradition that would continue long after the incident was forgotten. The royal guards, as they stood silent and vigilant, remained unaffected by the passage of time. Their role was unchanged, their duty unchanged, but the incident had reminded everyone around them of the importance of the values they represented. The royal guards were more than just figures in a uniform. Months passed after the incident, and the world moved on, as it often does. The man, having apologized and learned his lesson, quietly faded from the spotlight. Life for the royal guards resumed its unchanging rhythm, as if nothing had ever disrupted their presence. They continued to stand tall, guarding the palace and symbolizing the deep-rooted traditions that had been passed down through generations. However, the ripple effects of the apology lingered, shaping a more mindful and respectful society. The lessons learned during that pivotal moment remained fresh in the minds of many. While the incident had been sparked by one person's thoughtless act, the resulting discussions and reflections led to a wider cultural awakening. People began to take a step back and consider their actions, not just in relation to national symbols like the Royal Guards, but in all aspects of life. The story had shown that respect for the history and traditions of others was a vital part of living in a shared world. Tourists who came to visit the palace were now better informed, thanks to educational campaigns and guides that highlighted the significance of the Royal Guards. The lesson wasn't just for the man who had disrespected them. It had become an opportunity for everyone to learn about the deep-rooted history that shaped the country's culture. Visitors no longer saw the guards merely as part of a tourist attraction, but as living symbols of the country's enduring legacy. Some tourists even took time to learn about the rituals and history associated with the guards, and many returned home with a newfound appreciation for the traditions they had once overlooked. In the streets, people began to talk more openly about the importance of respect. It wasn't just about bowing to tradition. It was about recognizing the value of those things that connected the past with the present. More and more, people began to express their pride in the country's history, its symbols, and the duty of upholding those traditions for future generations. It wasn't a movement in the traditional sense, but rather a shift in the collective consciousness of the people. The incident had sparked something deeper, an understanding that culture wasn't something to be taken for granted. It was something to be cherished and protected. The Royal Guards, though they were the central point of the controversy, were ultimately unaffected by the public debates. They continued their duties with quiet dignity, as they had for centuries. For them, the apology and the lessons that followed were not something to celebrate. They were simply part of their ongoing role in the nation's heritage. Their presence was a constant reminder of the values that had shaped the nation over time. To them, this was just another chapter in their long history, but to others, it had become a turning point, a moment of reflection and understanding. As the years passed, the story of the man's disrespect toward the Royal Guards became a part of the country's broader cultural narrative. It was no longer just a single event, but a teaching tool, a reminder that sometimes a simple mistake could lead to a deeper understanding of the importance of respect and tradition. The man's apology, though it had been a small personal act, had become a symbol of the country's commitment to preserving its values. It was proof that the smallest actions, when approached with humility and sincerity, could lead to significant change. For the man, the journey of reflection continued. He never forgot the lessons he had learned during that time. His life had taken on a new sense of purpose, as he carried with him the knowledge of what it meant to be truly respectful of the cultures and traditions of the world around him. He found himself more considerate, more thoughtful in his interactions, understanding that the impact of one's actions could ripple outward in ways that were often unseen at first. The Royal Guards, in their silent watch, continued to serve as symbols of the nation's heritage, unchanged by time and unshaken by the occasional misstep of outsiders. They were the quiet backbone of the country, standing tall as living reminders of the importance of history, respect, and tradition. And as the years went by, their role remained a vital part of the country's identity. In the end, the incident served as a powerful reminder to everyone that respect is not something that can be assumed. It must be earned, understood, and given freely. It was a lesson that touched many lives and left an indelible mark on the culture of the nation. Though the public's attention shifted away from the event, the lessons it had taught would continue to resonate for years to come, ensuring that the Royal Guards remained not just protectors of the palace, but guardians of the respect and traditions that held the country together.